A forest fire took everything I owned, so I ran to my daughter's mansion. Her husband locked the gate. "You'll stain my imported marble floor. We're not a shelter for beggars leave." Desperate, I called my high school sweetheart's orphan son, the boy I treated like my own. Now a tech tycoon, they mocked me. When a fleet of black SUVs blocked their driveway and he stepped out to say that, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Lillian, and I'm 66 years old. 3 days ago, I lost everything I owned to a wildfire that swept through our neighborhood like God's own fury. Everything except the clothes on my back and the memories that no flame could ever touch. I stood in front of what used to be my home, watching the last wisps of smoke curl up from the charred remains of 40 years of my life. The wooden frame that my late husband David had built with his own hands was nothing but blackened skeleton now. The kitchen where I'd raised 2 children, well, where I'd raised Marcus and given birth to Capri, was a pile of ash and twisted metal. The insurance adjuster had already come and gone, leaving me with papers that basically said I'd get enough money to maybe buy a decent used car, not rebuild a life. Apparently, my policy didn't cover acts of God, and they considered this fire exactly that. I clutched my small suitcase tighter as I walked away from the ruins. Inside were the few precious things I'd managed to grab before evacuating. David's wedding ring, a photo of Marcus at his high school graduation, and the deed to the house that was now worthless paper. Everything else, the antique dining set David's mother had given us, the quilts I'd sewn by hand, the garden where I'd grown tomatoes for 35 years, all gone. The drive to Capri's house took 27 minutes through the winding hills of Marin County. I'd made this drive hundreds of times over the years, but it felt different now. I wasn't coming as a visiting mother bringing homemade cookies or to babysit grandchildren that never came. I was coming as someone who had nowhere else to go. Capri's mansion sat behind imposing iron gates, all glass and stone and cold modern lines that screamed money but whispered nothing about warmth. Darius had designed it himself, or rather, hired some famous architect to design it while he took the credit. The driveway could fit 10 cars easily, paved with stones that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. I pressed the intercom button and waited. Through the gates, I could see Darius's silver Porsche gleaming in the afternoon sun, and Capri's white BMW parked beside it like matching bookends of prosperity. "Yes?" The voice was crisp, professional. Not Capri's voice, probably their housekeeper. "It's Lillian Monroe, Capri's mother. I need to speak with my daughter." A long pause. Then, "One moment, please." I waited, shifting my weight from foot to foot. My back ached from sleeping on my friend Margaret's couch for the past 2 nights. But Margaret's apartment was tiny, and her husband had made it clear that 2 nights was all they could manage. Not that I blamed them. They had their own lives, their own problems. The intercom crackled again. "Mrs. Monroe, Mr. Darius says he'll speak with you." Mr. Darius. Not even his first name, like I was some stranger seeking an audience with royalty. The gates opened with a smooth, almost silent motion, and I walked up the long driveway, my worn tennis shoes silent on the expensive stone. The front door opened before I could knock, and there he was, Darius Wellington, my son-in-law for the past 22 years, looking at me like I'd brought something unpleasant in on my shoe. He was 48, but worked hard to look 35, with his perfectly styled hair and his shirts that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Everything about him was calculated, from his whitened teeth to his manicured nails. "Lillian." He didn't step aside to let me in. "This is unexpected. My house burned down, Darius. I have nowhere else to go." His eyes flicked over my rumpled clothes, my single suitcase, the soot still embedded under my fingernails despite scrubbing them raw. "I see. And you thought you'd just move in here?" "I thought my daughter might want to help her mother in a time of crisis." Something cold flickered across his face. Capri's not here right now. She's at her Pilates class. But I think I can speak for both of us when I say that our home isn't really set up for house guests. The way he said house guests made it clear he considered me something much less welcome. It would just be temporary, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Until I can figure something out. Darius stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door almost closed behind him. Through the gap, I caught a glimpse of their foyer, all white marble and crystal chandeliers, like something out of a magazine spread. Look, Lillian, I'm going to be straight with you because someone needs to be. His voice was low but carried the kind of authority he'd probably perfected in boardrooms. This house is worth $2 million. Everything in it is imported, custom, irreplaceable. The marble floors alone cost $30,000. We can't have someone who's been living in a fire zone tracking ash and whatever else through our home. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. Are you saying I'm too dirty for your house? I'm saying we're not a shelter for the displaced. There are resources available for people in your situation. Social services, emergency housing. I'd be happy to give you some phone numbers. The words hit me like physical blows. Social services, emergency housing. Like I was some homeless stranger, not the woman who'd changed his wife's diapers and taught her to read and held her through every nightmare she'd ever had. Where is Capri? I asked, my voice barely steady. I told you she's right there. I could see her through the window, standing in the kitchen, watching us. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Shame, maybe, or guilt. But she didn't move toward the door. Darius followed my gaze and sighed. Capri agrees with me on this. We both think it's better for everyone if you make other arrangements. Let me hear that from her. You don't need to hear it from her. I'm telling you. She's my daughter, not your property. His face hardened. She's my wife, and this is my house, and I'm telling you that you're not welcome here. You need to leave. I looked past him to where Capri still stood in the kitchen, frozen like a deer in headlights. She was wearing workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, looking every inch the wealthy suburban wife she'd become. Capri! I called out, my voice carrying across their perfect marble foyer. Capri, please! She took a step toward us, then stopped when Darius shot her a look. I watched my daughter, my only biological child, choose her husband's comfort over her mother's desperation. I think you need to go, Darius said, stepping back toward the door, before this becomes more unpleasant than it already is. More unpleasant? The words came out sharper than I intended. My house burned down. I have nothing left. And you're worried about your marble floors? I'm worried about maintaining the life we've built here. The life Capri deserves. The life she deserves? I gave her life. And now she's grown up and moved on. Maybe it's time you did the same. He stepped back inside and began to close the door. I caught it with my hand, my palm flat against the wood. Please, I whispered. I have nowhere else to go. For just a moment, something almost human flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone. There's a Holiday Inn about 5 miles down the highway, he said. They have weekly rates. The door closed with a soft click, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place. I stood there on their perfect porch, looking at their perfect door, feeling like I'd just been erased from existence. Behind me, their automatic sprinkler system whispered to life, sending arcs of water across their perfect lawn. As I walked back down their perfect driveway, I heard the electric gates begin to hum closed behind me. When I reached the street, I turned back to look at the house one more time. Capri was at the window again, watching me leave. She raised her hand slightly, maybe in goodbye, maybe in apology. I couldn't tell which. I sat in my old Honda at the curb for a long time, trying to figure out what to do next. The Holiday Inn weekly rate would eat through my savings in a month. Social services would probably put me in some depressing efficiency apartment with paper-thin walls and neighbors who played music too loud. That's when I remembered Marcus. Marcus Chen. The boy I'd raised from age 8, after his parents died in a car accident. David's best friend's son, who came to us broken and scared, and became the light of our lives for 10 years. The brilliant, funny, determined kid who'd gotten a full scholarship to Stanford and promised he'd never forget what we'd done for him. I hadn't spoken to Marcus in almost 2 years. Our last conversation had been brief, polite. He'd called on my birthday, asked how I was doing, told me a little about his work. He lived somewhere in Silicon Valley now, something to do with technology companies. Capri had mentioned once that he'd done well for himself, but she'd said it with the same tone she might use to discuss someone she'd known in high school. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There it was. Marcus Chen. I stared at the number for a long time, remembering the 18-year-old boy who'd hugged me so tight the day he left for college that I thought he might crack my ribs. "I'll make you proud," he'd whispered in my ear. "I'll never forget what you did for me." But that was 28 years ago. People change. People move on. People forget. Still, sitting there in my car with nowhere to go and nobody left to call, I pressed the number and held my breath. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice answered, deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably his. "Lillian?" He'd recognized my number after all these years. Something tight in my chest loosened just a little. "Marcus," I said, and my voice broke on his name. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I need help. Don't move. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming to get you." Those were Marcus's first words after I finished telling him about the fire, about Darius, about everything. No questions about whether I was sure, no suggestions about other options, no hesitation at all. Just immediate, fierce protection from a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years. "Marcus, you don't have to. Where are you right now?" I told him I was parked outside Capri's house, and I heard something like a growl come through the phone. "Stay exactly where you are. I'll be there in 45 minutes. The line went dead, and I sat there staring at my phone, wondering what I'd just set in motion. 45 minutes from Silicon Valley to Marin County meant he was either flying or breaking every speed limit in California. While I waited, my mind drifted back to the first time I saw Marcus Chen. He was 8 years old, standing in our living room in clothes that didn't fit properly, clutching a plastic bag with everything he owned in the world. His parents, David's best friend Robert and his wife Lynn, had been killed in a head-on collision with a drunk driver 3 days earlier. Robert had been David's partner on the police force for 15 years. They'd saved each other's lives more times than either of them ever told their wives. When Robert died, David didn't even hesitate. "The boy comes home with us," he'd said in that quiet, final tone he used when his mind was made up. Robert would have done the same for Capri. I was 34 then, with 6-year-old Capri and a house that felt full enough already. But one look at Marcus, thin and hollow-eyed, trying so hard to be brave, and I knew David was right. Those first few months were harder than I'd expected. Marcus barely spoke, picked at his food, and had nightmares that left him screaming in the middle of the night. Capri, who'd been the center of our universe for 6 years, suddenly had to share everything. Attention, bedtime stories, the front seat of the car. She didn't handle it well. "When is he going back to his real house?" she asked me one morning while Marcus was at school. "This is his real house now, sweetheart. We're his family now." "But I don't want a brother. I was here first." I tried to explain that Marcus had lost everything, that he needed us, that families could grow and change. But Capri was 6, and all she understood was that the boy sleeping in what used to be the guest room was taking something that belonged to her. Marcus, for his part, seemed to understand exactly what was happening. He was careful around Capri, never competing with her for attention, always deferring to her preferences. If she wanted to watch a particular TV show, he'd agree. If she didn't want to play a game, he'd find something else to do. He made himself small, as if he thought that taking up less space might make him more welcome. It broke my heart. The breakthrough came 6 months after he'd moved in. I was making dinner when I heard shouting from the backyard. I rushed outside to find Capri on the ground, crying, with Marcus standing over her holding a baseball bat. "What happened?" I demanded. "She was going to step on the bee," Marcus said, pointing to a large bumblebee crawling slowly across the patio. "I told her not to, but she said she was going to squish it, so I knocked her down." "It's just a stupid bee," Capri wailed. "It's not stupid," Marcus said fiercely. "It's alive, and it didn't do anything wrong. You can't just kill things because you feel like it." I looked at this 8-year-old boy, so thin I could count his ribs through his t-shirt, defending a bee with the same intensity some kids brought to protecting their toys. Something clicked into place in my chest. "Marcus is right," I said, helping Capri to her feet. "We don't hurt things just because we can." That night, after Capri was asleep, I found Marcus in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of milk and looking out the window at nothing. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" I asked. He nodded, not looking at me. "I'm proud of what you did today," I said, standing up for that bee. That took courage. He shrugged. "Capri's mad at me now. Capri will get over it. But I want you to know something, Marcus. This is your home. You don't have to make yourself small to fit here. You don't have to hide who you are to make other people comfortable." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw tears in his dark eyes. "My mom used to say that too," he whispered. "Your mom was smart, and she'd want you to remember who you are, even when things are hard." That's when he started crying, not the careful, quiet tears he'd shed those first few months, but big, ugly, 8-year-old sobs that shook his whole body. I pulled him onto my lap, this boy who was too old to be held like a baby, but too young to carry such enormous grief alone, and let him cry until he was empty. "I miss them so much," he said into my shoulder. "I know, baby. I know you do. Will you be my mom now? Not instead of her, but also?" I held him tighter, breathing in the smell of his strawberry shampoo and feeling my heart expand to make room for another child. "Yes," I whispered, "if you'll let me." From that night forward, everything changed. Marcus stopped hiding, started laughing, began to fill out the space he was entitled to in our family. Capri, seeing that her position wasn't actually threatened, gradually warmed up to having a big brother who helped her with homework and taught her to throw a curveball. But it was always different between them. Marcus loved Capri the way older brothers do. Protective, patient, kind. But Capri's love for Marcus was conditional, based on what he could do for her, rather than who he was. Even as a child, she saw him as an addition to the family, rather than a true member of it. The years that followed were some of the happiest of my life. Marcus was brilliant, not just smart, but creative and intuitive in ways that constantly surprised me. He'd build elaborate contraptions out of cardboard and tape, write stories that made me laugh and cry, ask questions that sent me scrambling for encyclopedias. He was also kind in a way that seemed almost genetic, as if compassion had been written into his DNA. He brought home stray cats and wounded birds, stood up for kids who were being bullied, spent his allowance on birthday presents for friends whose families couldn't afford them. David adored him. "That boy's going to change the world someday," he'd say, watching Marcus explain some new invention or help Capri with a science project. "Mark my words, Lil. He's special." When David died of a heart attack during Marcus's junior year of high school, Marcus grieved like he was losing his father all over again. The night after the funeral, I found him in David's workshop, just sitting among the tools and half-finished projects. "He was proud of you," I told him. "So proud." "I wanted to make him proud for longer," Marcus said, his voice thick with tears. "You will. Every day for the rest of your life, you'll make him proud." Marcus graduated valedictorian and got a full scholarship to Stanford. The night before he left for college, He sat with me in the kitchen where we'd had so many important conversations over the years. "I'm going to pay you back," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For everything. The food, the clothes, the roof over my head. College tuition you would have paid if I hadn't gotten the scholarship. Everything." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Marcus, you don't owe me anything. That's not how family works. You took me in when you didn't have to. You loved me when I wasn't even yours. You were always mine," I said fiercely. "From the moment you walked through that door." He squeezed my hand. "I'm going to make you proud, Mom. I'm going to build something amazing. And when I do, I'm going to make sure you never have to worry about money again." I laughed, thinking he meant some distant future when he'd established himself in whatever career he chose. "Just focus on your studies and being happy. That's all I want." But Marcus was serious in a way I didn't fully understand then. "I mean it, Mom. I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me." After he left for Stanford, he called every Sunday without fail. Then every 2 weeks during graduate school. Then monthly as he started his career and built his life in Silicon Valley. The calls became shorter, more focused on checking in than catching up, but they never stopped completely. Capri, meanwhile, married Darius right after college, and gradually drifted away from our family traditions, our values, everything that had once connected us. She stopped calling Marcus her brother, started referring to him as Mom's foster kid when she bothered to mention him at all. "He's not really family," she said once when I suggested inviting Marcus to her birthday party. "I mean, I love him and everything, but it's not the same as blood." I should have corrected her then. I should have said that family isn't about blood. It's about choice and love and showing up for each other. But I didn't want to start a fight, so I stayed quiet and watched my daughter slowly erase Marcus from our family story. Now, sitting in my car outside her mansion, waiting for the boy I'd raised to come rescue me from the daughter I'd given birth to, I realized I should have fought that fight a long time ago. A black SUV came around the corner going faster than the speed limit allowed in this neighborhood. It pulled up behind my Honda, and before I could even process what was happening, Marcus was out of the driver's seat and walking toward my car. 28 years had changed him, but I would have recognized that purposeful stride anywhere. He was taller than I remembered, broader through the shoulders, with silver threading through his black hair. But his eyes, warm, intelligent, determined, were exactly the same. He knocked on my window, and when I rolled it down, he leaned in and kissed my forehead the same way he had when he was 10 years old and wanted to comfort me. "Hi, Mom," he said simply, and just like that, I wasn't homeless anymore. Marcus stepped back from my car and looked toward Capri's house, his jaw set in a way I remembered from when he was a teenager dealing with bullies at school. He'd always been slow to anger, but when something truly unfair happened, there was a steel in him that surprised people who mistook his kindness for weakness. "Stay here for just a minute," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent I'd never heard before. "I need to have a conversation with your son-in-law." "Marcus, please don't make this worse. I just need somewhere to stay until—" He knelt beside my open window, putting us at eye level. "Mom, do you trust me?" The question caught me off guard. Of course I trusted him, but something in his tone made me understand he was asking about more than just this moment. "Yes," I said simply. "Then trust me now. This ends today." He stood up and walked to his SUV, pulling out his phone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but within minutes, 2 more identical black vehicles pulled up and parked along the street. Men in dark suits stepped out, not threatening exactly, but clearly not ordinary businessmen either. My heart started racing. "Marcus, what are you doing?" But he was already walking up Capri's driveway, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in what sounded like Mandarin. The men from the other cars flanked him at a distance, professional and alert. Marcus pressed the intercom button and waited. When Darius's voice crackled through, Marcus spoke in that same calm tone I'd heard him use as a child, when he was explaining why he'd done something that looked wrong, but was actually right. "Mr. Wellington, this is Marcus Chen. I believe you've just had a conversation with my mother. I'd like to continue that conversation face to face." A long pause. "I'm sorry. Who?" "Lillian's son. I'm here to discuss her living arrangements." Another pause, longer this time. I could imagine Darius frantically trying to remember if Capri had ever mentioned having a brother, trying to calculate whether this was something he needed to take seriously. The gates opened. Marcus walked up the driveway like he owned it, and something about his confidence made me wonder if maybe he did. The men in suits remained by their cars, but their presence was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just one person coming to plead for help. This was power arriving at the door. I couldn't hear what happened next, but I could see through the large windows as Marcus was led into the living room. Darius appeared first, then Capri emerged from wherever she'd been hiding. Even from the street, I could see her body language change when she saw Marcus. Surprise, confusion, and something that might have been shame. They talked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. I watched Darius's posture shift from dismissive to defensive, to something that looked like panic. I watched Capri sink into one of their expensive chairs, her head in her hands. Then Marcus pulled out a folder from inside his jacket and spread papers across their coffee table. That's when Darius started shouting. I couldn't make out words, but the gestures were universal, pointing at the papers, pointing at Marcus, pointing toward where I sat in my car. Marcus remained perfectly still, letting Darius exhaust himself against his calm. When the yelling stopped, Marcus said something that made both Capri and Darius go completely motionless. Then he walked back outside, down the driveway, straight to my car. "What just happened?" I asked. Marcus leaned against my car door, suddenly looking tired. "I told them the truth about your financial situation, and mine." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Mom, you know how I always said I was going to take care of you? That I was going to make sure you never had to worry about money? Marcus, I told you 100 times, you don't owe me anything. I know what you told me. But what you never understood is that I wasn't talking about paying back a debt. I was talking about love." He pulled out his phone and showed me a banking app. The number on the screen had so many digits I couldn't process it at first. "For the last 20 years, I've been putting money into a trust fund with your name on it. Every bonus, every successful investment, every major business deal. A percentage goes into that account." I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Marcus, this says, this can't be right." $50 million, he said quietly. "It's yours. It's always been yours. I've just been waiting for you to need it or want it." The world seemed to tilt sideways. 50 million? The interest alone generates more per month than most people make in a year. You could buy 10 houses like Capri's if you wanted to. I looked from the phone to Marcus to the house where my daughter and her husband were probably still staring at whatever papers he'd left on their coffee table. "I don't understand. If I have all this money, why didn't you ever tell me?" Marcus smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the 8-year-old boy who'd defended a bee in our backyard. "Because you would have given it away. To Capri, to charity, to anyone who needed it more than you thought you did. You would have made yourself poor trying to make other people comfortable." He was right, and we both knew it. But how? I mean, how do you have this kind of money to give away? Remember those contraptions I used to build in David's workshop? Those questions I was always asking about how things worked? I nodded. I turned those into patents, software solutions for problems that didn't even exist yet when I filed them. The smartphone revolution, cloud computing, artificial intelligence. I saw it all coming because you taught me to ask the right questions. He gestured toward the house. I founded 3 companies that sold for more than $1 billion each. I own stakes in about 50 others. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, And none of it would exist if you hadn't taken in a scared little boy and taught him that he was worth something. The numbers were too big, too impossible. But the love in his voice was absolutely real. Marcus, I can't accept. It's not a gift, Mom. It's not charity. It's yours. It's been yours since the day you first called me your son. Behind us, I heard the front door of the house slam open. Darius came storming down the driveway, his face red with rage. "This is extortion!" he shouted. "You can't just show up here making threats!" Marcus straightened up, and suddenly the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I haven't made any threats, Mr. Wellington. I've simply informed you and your wife that your assessment of my mother's financial situation was inaccurate." "You're lying. She's on Social Security, living in some dump that burned down. If she had money, she wouldn't be here begging for a place to stay." "She wasn't begging," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "She was seeking comfort from her daughter during a crisis. The fact that you couldn't distinguish between those two things tells me everything I need to know about your character." Capri appeared behind Darius, looking pale and shaken. "Marcus, is it true? About the money?" "Every word." "But why didn't you ever say anything? All these years I thought—" "You thought she was poor and therefore not worth your respect. You thought I was nobody because I didn't share your DNA. You thought money was the only thing that mattered." Marcus's voice never rose, but each word hit like a physical blow. "You were wrong about all of it." Darius was still sputtering about documentation and verification, but Capri just stared at me sitting in my old Honda with my single suitcase. "Mom," she said, and her voice cracked on the word. "I didn't know." "What you didn't know," Marcus said, "is that your mother has spent the last 20 years turning down every attempt I've made to improve her living situation. New house, new car, vacations, investments. She refused it all because she said she had everything she needed." He looked directly at Capri. "She had you, or she thought she did." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear birds singing in the expensive trees, sprinklers whispering across the perfect lawn, the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Normal sounds from a world that had just been turned completely upside down. "I want to see documentation," Darius said finally, but his bluster was gone. "Bank statements, legal papers. Anyone can show numbers on a phone." Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Of course. My attorneys will be happy to provide you with complete financial records. In fact, they're already preparing them." He checked his watch. "They should be here in about 15 minutes. As if on cue, another black SUV rounded the corner, followed by what looked like a small convoy of expensive cars. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "what have you done?" "Something I should have done years ago." He opened my car door and offered me his hand. "Come on, Mom, let's go home." "But I don't have a home." He smiled, and this time it was warm and real and full of the love that had sustained us both through the hardest parts of our lives. "Yes, you do." The convoy that arrived at Capri's house looked like something out of a movie. 3 more SUVs, 2 luxury sedans, and what appeared to be a mobile command center disguised as a black van. Men and women in expensive suits emerged carrying briefcases and tablets, moving with the precision of a military operation. I stood beside Marcus on the sidewalk, still trying to process what he'd told me about the $50 million, watching my quiet, kind son orchestrate what could only be described as a show of force. "Marcus, this seems like a lot for—" "Mom, I need you to understand something." He turned to face me, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "This isn't just about today. This isn't just about Darius being cruel to you, though that would be enough. This is about 20 years of preparation for a moment I hoped would never come." A woman in her 40s approached us, elegant and professional, carrying a tablet and a folder thick enough to be a phone book. "Mrs. Monroe," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Sarah Liu, Marcus's attorney and financial advisor. It's such an honor to finally meet you." Marcus talks about you constantly. She turned to Marcus. Everything's ready, just as we discussed. What's ready? I asked, feeling increasingly like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. Marcus gestured toward the house where Darius and Capri stood frozen in their doorway, watching the parade of legal and financial professionals arrange themselves on their perfect lawn. The complete documentation of your financial portfolio, he said, but that's only part of it. Sarah, show her the real estate holdings. Sarah tapped her tablet and handed it to me. The screen showed a map of Northern California dotted with red pins, each one marking a property location. This is everything we've acquired on your behalf over the past 15 years, Sarah explained. The house that burned down? We actually purchased it from the city 2 years ago when they were going to tear it down for a development project. You've been living in your own house without knowing it. I stared at the screen. My house? Technically, the Lillian Monroe Family Trust owns it, along with the 4 houses on either side of it and the entire block behind it. The fire damage is fully covered by commercial insurance policies that go far beyond what normal homeowners insurance would provide. Marcus pointed to another cluster of pins. That area there is where Capri lives. We own her house too. The tablet nearly slipped from my hands. What? Not her mortgage, Marcus clarified. The house itself. We bought it from the bank 3 years ago when Darius defaulted on his payments. He doesn't know. Capri doesn't know. They think they're still making mortgage payments, but the money's actually going into an escrow account that we use for property maintenance. I looked toward the house where my daughter lived, my house, apparently, and felt reality shifting beneath my feet like an earthquake. Why? I asked. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you being shut out of your daughter's life because she couldn't afford to keep up the lifestyle she wanted. I thought if I removed the financial pressure quietly, maybe she'd become the person you raised her to be. Sarah showed me another screen. The property management company that maintains their lawn, fixes their plumbing, handles all their home repairs. That's ours too. Every time something breaks in that house, we fix it. Every time their property value goes up because of neighborhood improvements, we're the ones funding those improvements. For 3 years? For 7 years, actually. The house purchase was just the final step. Marcus's voice carried a sadness I'd never heard from him before. I've been trying to create a safety net around your entire family without them knowing it. The account where Capri deposits her part-time job paycheck? We own the bank. When she shops at that expensive grocery store she loves, we're majority shareholders. That private school where she volunteers? We funded their new library. The scope of it was staggering. Marcus, why go to all this trouble? Because you love her. And I couldn't stand watching her choices hurt you. But I also couldn't stand watching you blame yourself for her choices. One of the younger lawyers approached with another folder. The documentation is ready for Mr. Wellington if you want to proceed. Marcus nodded. Let's get this over with. We walked up the driveway as a group, Marcus and me in front, followed by what looked like enough legal firepower to buy and sell a small country. Darius and Capri had retreated into their living room, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows that were probably meant to show off their perfect life to the world. When we entered the house, Darius was pacing behind his white leather sofa like a caged animal. Capri sat on the edge of a chair that cost more than most cars, looking small and lost in the vast, cold space she'd chosen to call home. All right, Darius said without preamble. I want to see these supposed bank statements. Because if you think you can intimidate us with some kind of elaborate hoax. Sarah placed 3 thick folders on the coffee table with the kind of authority that comes from years of dealing with rich men who think volume equals validity. Complete financial documentation for the Lillian Monroe Family Trust, she said crisply. Assets, investments, property holdings, and liquid cash reserves, all authenticated by 3 independent accounting firms. Darius opened the first folder, and I watched his face go through a fascinating series of changes. Skepticism gave way to confusion, confusion to disbelief, disbelief to a kind of pale shock that made him sink onto the sofa like his legs couldn't support him anymore. This can't be right," he stammered. "I assure you it is. Mrs. Monroe is worth approximately $237 million, with assets that appreciate at roughly $15 million annually." The number hit me like a physical blow. $237 million? Marcus nodded. "The trust has been growing for 20 years, Mom. Compound interest on smart investments is a powerful thing." Capri finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, you're rich?" "Apparently. But you've been living in that little house, driving that old car, shopping at—" "She's been living the life she chose," Marcus interrupted. "We offered to change it literally hundreds of times." Sarah pulled out another document. Phone records of calls made to Mrs. Monroe over the past 5 years, offering various lifestyle improvements, recorded invitations to relocate to larger properties, accept luxury vehicles, take vacations, invest in business opportunities. All politely declined. "Why?" Capri asked, looking at me with something that might have been the first genuine emotion she'd shown all day. I thought about how to answer that. How do you explain to someone who measures worth in marble floors and designer clothes that some things matter more than money? "Because I had everything I needed," I said finally. "A home that held memories of your father, a car that ran, enough food and enough warmth and the hope that maybe my daughter would visit more often." The silence that followed was broken only by the rustle of papers as Darius continued flipping through financial documents like a man searching for evidence that reality wasn't what it appeared to be. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. Darius looked up with the expression of a man who'd already absorbed more than he could process. Marcus gestured to another lawyer, who produced a set of blueprints. 3 blocks from here, we've purchased a 12-acre estate. The main house is 15,000 square feet, with separate guest houses, a full staff, and grounds that include gardens, a small lake, and complete privacy. He spread the blueprints across the coffee table, pushing aside the financial documents. "We broke ground 18 months ago. It should be completed in 6 weeks." I stared at the architectural drawings, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. It was a mansion, but somehow warm and inviting rather than cold and imposing. Large windows, comfortable spaces, rooms designed for living rather than showing off. "This is for me? This is your home, the one we've been building for you since we realized that house might not always be available." Marcus traced one of the lines on the blueprint with his finger. "This room here? It's a library, designed to match the one in David's workshop where you used to read to me. And this is a garden space based on the one you had behind your old house." "Marcus, I can't—" "Mom," he said gently, "what if I told you that all of this, the money, the houses, the businesses, none of it matters to me except as a way to take care of you?" I looked around the room at all these professional people, all this evidence of wealth and power, and realized that none of it felt real. What felt real was the boy who'd once defended a bee, grown up into a man who'd spent 20 years building an empire not for himself, but for the woman who'd loved him when he had nothing. "What about them?" I asked, nodding toward Capri and Darius. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "What about them?" "They're my family too, Marcus. Capri is my daughter." "I know. And that's why we're going to give them a choice." Marcus walked to the center of Capri's living room, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture I remembered from when he was 12 years old, and had to explain to his teacher why he'd given his lunch money to a classmate whose family couldn't afford school meals. "The choice is simple," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd learned that real power doesn't need to be loud. "You can be part of our family, or you can continue to be part of your current life. But you can't have both." Darius looked up from the financial documents he'd been studying like they might suddenly reveal themselves to be forgeries. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means," Sarah interjected smoothly, "that this house and everything in it becomes part of Mrs. Monroe's estate, effective immediately. You have been living here as tenants, essentially, though you didn't know it. Capri's face went white. You're evicting us? We're giving you options, Marcus corrected. Option 1. You acknowledge that your treatment of my mother was unacceptable, you genuinely apologize, and you commit to being the daughter and family member she deserves. If you choose this option, you continue living here, all your expenses are covered, and you become part of something larger than yourselves. He paused, letting that sink in. Option 2. You decide that your current lifestyle and attitudes are more important than family relationships. In which case, you have 30 days to find alternative housing, and we sever all financial and personal connections permanently. The silence in the room was so complete I could hear the expensive clock ticking on their mantelpiece. You can't do this, Darius said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, we can, Sarah replied, producing another set of documents. The mortgage default that led to our purchase of this property was based on your failure to make payments for 6 consecutive months. The foreclosure proceedings were already in motion when we intervened. She placed a bank statement in front of Darius. This shows your actual financial situation at the time. You were 3 months away from bankruptcy. Darius stared at the papers like they'd personally betrayed him. That was a temporary situation. My business. Your business, according to our research, hasn't turned a profit in 4 years. You've been living off credit cards and Capri's small income while maintaining the appearance of success. Marcus sat down across from Capri, his expression softening slightly. I know this is a lot to process, but you need to understand what happened here today. When Mom came to your door asking for help, you didn't just turn away a homeless woman. You turned away your mother, the person who changed your diapers, sat up with you when you had fever, taught you to read, celebrated every accomplishment, and loved you unconditionally for 44 years. Capri's eyes filled with tears. I know, but Darius said a lot of things, Marcus interrupted gently. But you're not married to your mother. You're married to him. So you get to choose who you want to be. I watched my daughter struggle with something I'd never seen her face before, a choice that would define her character rather than her comfort. What about him? She asked, glancing at Darius. What about him? If I choose you and Mom, what happens to my marriage? Marcus leaned back in his chair. That's between you and him, but I'll say this. A man who thinks imported marble is more important than basic human decency probably isn't going to adjust well to being married to someone who chooses family over status. Darius stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. This is insane. You can't just show up here and demand that people choose between their marriages and their families. I'm not demanding anything, Marcus replied calmly. I'm presenting facts and allowing people to make informed decisions. The fact is that Mom has spent decades being treated as less important than your comfort. The fact is that she has more wealth than both of you will see in 10 lifetimes, but she's never used that wealth to force your respect or affection. He stood up as well, facing Darius directly. The fact is that she's been subsidizing your lifestyle without your knowledge, because she couldn't bear to see her daughter struggle, even when that daughter couldn't be bothered to return her phone calls. We didn't know about the money, Capri said weakly. You didn't know about the money, but you knew she was your mother. You knew she'd never hurt you, never stolen from you, never been anything but kind and generous. And you knew that when she came here today, she was desperate and scared and looking for help from the people who should love her most. Marcus's voice finally carried some heat. You didn't need to know about money to know that turning your back on her was wrong. I watched Capri process this, saw something shift in her expression. For the first time in years, she looked like the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. Mom, she said, turning to me with tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But Darius wasn't finished. This is emotional blackmail. You're using money to manipulate family relationships. No, I said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the house. What you did to me this afternoon was manipulation. What Marcus is doing is giving you consequences for your choices. I stood up and walked over to where Capri sat, kneeling beside her chair like I had when she was small and needed comfort. Sweetheart, I need you to understand something. For the last 20 years, I've watched you become someone I don't recognize. Someone who measures people by their bank accounts and their possessions instead of their hearts. Someone who's ashamed of where she came from and who raised her. I took her hands in mine. I love you. I will always love you. But I can't pretend anymore that love is enough if it's not returned with basic respect. Capri was crying harder now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I didn't mean to become this person. I know, baby, but the question now is, who do you want to be going forward? Darius moved behind Capri's chair, placing his hands on her shoulders in a gesture that might have looked protective but felt possessive. Capri, think about what you're giving up, he said. Our life, our friends, everything we've built together. Everything we've built, Marcus said quietly, was built on money that came from her mother. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, all of it was subsidized by the woman you insulted and humiliated today. Sarah produced another document. This is a complete accounting of every financial intervention we've made on your behalf over the past 7 years. Property maintenance, mortgage assumption, emergency funds transferred to cover shortfalls. The total comes to just over $4 million. The number hung in the air like an accusation. 4 million? Darius stammered. 4 million, Sarah confirmed. None of which Mrs. Monroe was obligated to provide. All of which was given quietly to prevent her daughter from experiencing financial stress. I watched understanding dawn on Capri's face. You've been taking care of us this whole time. We've been taking care of you, Marcus corrected. Him I couldn't care less about, but your family, even when you don't act like it. Darius's grip on Capri's shoulders tightened. Don't let them guilt you into throwing away your marriage. What marriage? Marcus asked bluntly. The one where you've been living off her mother's money while treating her mother like garbage? The one where you've isolated her from her family and convinced her that wealth and status are more important than love and loyalty? He pulled out his phone and showed the screen to both of them. This is your credit report, Darius. Your personal debt, excluding the mortgage we've been covering, is $273,000. Your business is 3 months behind on rent. Your country club membership is in arrears. Without our intervention, you would have lost everything 6 months ago. The phone went back into his pocket. So when you tell Capri to think about what she's giving up, maybe you should be honest about what she's actually holding on to. Capri looked up at Darius with something that might have been seeing him clearly for the first time. Is that true? His silence was answer enough. Oh God, she whispered. What have I become? She stood up suddenly, stepping away from Darius's hands, and turned to face me. Mom, I choose you. I choose family. I choose being the person you raised me to be instead of the person I thought I wanted to become. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it was almost physical. My daughter, my little girl, was still in there somewhere, but Darius wasn't done fighting. You're making a mistake, Capri. You think they're going to just forgive and forget? You think this is going to be some happy family reunion? They're going to hold this over your head for the rest of your life. Marcus smiled, and it was gentle and sad and full of the wisdom that comes from understanding what really matters. Actually, he said, we're going to do something much worse than that. Darius tensed. What? We're going to love her unconditionally, just like we always have. 6 weeks later, I stood in the garden of my new home, watching Marcus direct a team of landscapers as they planted the last of the tomato seedlings in the vegetable garden he'd designed to match the one that had burned in the fire. The morning sun was warm on my shoulders, and the smell of fresh soil and new growth filled the air with promises of abundance. The house Marcus had built for me was everything I never knew I wanted. Large enough to host family gatherings, comfortable enough to feel like home. beautiful enough to take my breath away every morning when I opened my bedroom curtains. But more than that, it was built with love in every detail. From the reading nook designed to get the perfect afternoon light, to the kitchen island sized exactly right for rolling out pie dough. "The cherry tomatoes should be ready by August," Marcus called over to me, dirt smudged on his expensive shirt, "just like the ones you used to grow." I smiled, thinking about how he still remembered which varieties had been my favorites, even after all these years. Capri emerged from the house carrying a tray with iced tea and sandwiches, moving carefully on the stepping stones Marcus had placed to make the path easier for me to navigate. She'd been living here for 3 weeks now, sleeping in one of the guest rooms while she figured out what came next in her life. "Lunch is ready," she called, setting the tray on the wrought iron table under the pergola. Watching her serve iced tea in mason jars instead of crystal glasses, seeing her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of an elaborate style, observing how she'd traded designer clothes for comfortable jeans and cotton shirts. It was like watching my daughter emerge from a costume she'd been wearing for 20 years. The divorce had been finalized the week before. Darius had fought it initially, trying to claim half of assets that had never belonged to him, but Sarah's legal team had made it clear that his options were limited. In the end, he'd taken a settlement that left him comfortable but not wealthy, and disappeared from our lives with the kind of bitter resentment that only comes from having your true character exposed. "Where do you want to go for your birthday dinner?" Capri asked as we settled around the table. "Marcus said he'd make reservations anywhere you'd like." My 67th birthday was still 2 weeks away, but they'd been planning it like children excited about Christmas morning. It felt strange to be the center of so much attention after years of feeling invisible. Honestly, I'd rather stay home, have a barbecue in the backyard, maybe invite a few neighbors. Marcus and Capri exchanged a look. "What?" I asked. "We were hoping you'd say that," Marcus admitted, "because we've already invited about 50 people. 50 people? Capri grinned, and for a moment she looked exactly like the 6-year-old who used to help me plan surprise parties for her father. "Your old neighbors from before the fire, some of Dad's police friends, teachers from the school where you used to volunteer, the ladies from your book club, everyone who's been part of your life. We thought it was time for people to see how you're really living now," Marcus added, "and time for you to stop hiding your light under a bushel." I looked around at the beautiful garden, at the house that had been designed around my dreams and preferences, at my son and daughter planning celebrations in my honor, and felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in decades. "There's something else," Capri said, suddenly serious. "Something I need to tell you." My heart clenched with automatic worry. "What is it?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped box. "I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment." I unwrapped it carefully and found my grandmother's engagement ring inside, the one I'd given to Capri on her wedding day, the one she'd worn throughout her marriage to Darius. "I want you to have this back," she said quietly. "I don't deserve to wear it anymore." "Capri." "No, let me finish. This ring represents 53 years of marriage between 2 people who loved each other genuinely, who supported each other through everything, who built a real life together based on respect and partnership." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I wore it while I was married to someone who taught me that love was conditional, that family was expendable, that appearance mattered more than substance." She closed my fingers around the ring. "I want to earn the right to wear it again someday, but only when I'm with someone who understands what it really means." I slipped the ring onto my right hand, where it felt both familiar and new. "What will you do now?" "I'm going back to school," she said, sitting up straighter. "Marcus is helping me apply to nursing programs. I want to do something that matters, something that helps people instead of just consuming resources." Marcus smiled proudly. "She's already volunteering at the community clinic downtown. The head nurse says she's a natural." "It feels good," Capri added, "to be useful again, to remember who I was before I got so lost in trying to be someone else." We spent the afternoon working in the garden together, planting herbs and flowers, getting our hands dirty in a way that felt both grounding and hopeful. As the sun began to set, Marcus fired up the outdoor kitchen he'd installed, and we grilled burgers and corn on the cob like we had when they were children. After dinner, Capri excused herself to study for her entrance exams, leaving Marcus and me alone on the back patio. The evening air was soft and warm, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant laughter of neighbors enjoying their own backyards. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked him suddenly. "Regret what?" "All of this. The money, the time, the energy you've spent taking care of me. You could have had anything, done anything, been anything." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, swirling the ice in his glass. "Mom, do you know what my first memory is?" I shook my head. "I'm 8 years old, standing in our old kitchen, crying because I'd broken one of your good plates while trying to help with the dishes. You knelt down beside me and said, 'Marcus, accidents happen. What matters is that you were trying to help.'" He looked at me with eyes that still held traces of that 8-year-old boy. That was the moment I understood that love doesn't keep score. That family means showing up for each other, even when it's inconvenient or expensive or complicated. "But surely your own life—" "My own life has been built on the foundation you gave me. Every success, every achievement, every moment of happiness I've experienced has been possible because you taught me I was worth something, because you showed me what unconditional love looks like." He reached over and took my hand. "I'm not taking care of you out of obligation, Mom. I'm taking care of you because you're the most important person in my world, and because making sure you're safe and happy and comfortable is what makes my life meaningful." Tears blurred my vision as I squeezed his fingers. "I love you too, son." "I know," he said simply. "You've been showing me that every day for 38 years. Later that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I stood at my bedroom window looking out over the grounds Marcus had created for me. Tomorrow, the landscapers would finish the walking path that wound through the oak trees to the small lake where he'd installed a bench facing the water. Next week, the contractors would complete the greenhouse where I could grow flowers year-round. But tonight, what struck me wasn't the luxury or the beauty or even the thoughtfulness of it all. What struck me was the peace. For the first time in decades, I wasn't worried about anyone else's happiness or comfort or approval. I wasn't calculating how to make myself smaller so others could be bigger, or how to give more so others would love me. I wasn't managing anyone else's emotions or expectations. I was simply, completely, contentedly myself. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Margaret, my old neighbor whose couch I'd slept on for 2 nights after the fire. "Saw the article about you in the paper today. So proud and happy for you. Always knew you were special, even when you didn't know it yourself." I smiled, remembering how lost and desperate I'd felt just 6 weeks ago. How certain I'd been that my value as a person was tied to how useful I could be to others, how much I could sacrifice, how little space I could occupy. Now I lived in a 15,000-square-foot house on 12 acres of gardens and walking trails. I had more money than I could spend in several lifetimes, a son who would move mountains to see me smile, and a daughter who was slowly but genuinely finding her way back to the person I'd raised her to be. But more than any of that, I had something I'd never truly possessed before: the absolute certainty that I was loved not for what I could provide, but for who I was. As I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I thought about David and how proud he would be to see the man Marcus had become. I thought about the scared 8-year-old boy who'd once defended a bee in our backyard, and marveled at how that same fierce protectiveness now surrounded me like armor. And I thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the tomorrows that stretched ahead, days that belonged entirely to me, filled with people who loved me genuinely, in a home built on the foundation of the most powerful force in the universe. A mother's love, returned in full measure by a son who understood its worth. Outside my window, the garden held the promise of future harvests, future seasons, future moments of simple joy shared with the people who mattered most. I was finally, completely home. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.